When it comes to the question of covenant relationship, how covenant works in our lives, one of the central features of covenant that we're going to have to become clear on if our covenant relationships are going to function the way God intends them to function, our covenant with God himself, our covenants with each other, we're going to have to get clear on the nature of a slippery term, namely the term love. Here's the challenge about even talking about love, let alone actually loving people, each other, loving God, others, ourselves, or creation. To do the four loves, we have to be clear on what we're meaning by this slippery term love. In our culture, one of the challenges around love is that even using the term becomes a little confusing. Love has become a term that means almost anything. In fact, you can even use the word love for the opposite of love. And because of the confusion around this single word, a lot of hurt can happen, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of setting each other and ourselves up for pain and confusion. Take this question, for example. Is everlasting love possible? Right? This question gets to the nature of love itself. What is love, and can it last? Or does love always involve eventually pain and the ending of relationships, right? Different perspectives on this question through human history. Is everlasting love possible? What do you think? What do I think? Well, here's one gentleman's thoughts on that. 20th century Russian writer and playwright, Mikhail Bulgakov. And he put it this way. He said, "Whoever told you there's no such thing in this world as real, true, everlasting love, may that liar have his despicable tongue cut out." Clearly not an Anabaptist, a little violent, but his point is this guy believes in everlasting love, and he's ready to cut the tongue out of whoever says otherwise. Jump ahead a few decades, and Atlantic Monthly, in January 2013 issue, had as one of its stories, "There is no such thing as everlasting love, according to science." And it's an article that talks about the fact that our feelings of love that we experience are really just chemical reactions in our brain, and that they're short-lived, that they can't be sustained for long periods of time. And so there really isn't such a thing as everlasting love. Different perspectives on a very important question. To kind of introduce our own reflections on love here, let me give you some thoughts on love from a variety of people through the centuries. We'll go way back in history to begin with, all the way back to Aristotle, but we'll eventually come up to our day of age here. But different people's thoughts on this wild notion called love. Aristotle said this about love: "Love is composed of a single soul inhabiting two bodies." There's Aristotle's theory of love. A single soul inhabiting two bodies. Now, it's quite possible that Aristotle's referring to a myth in the ancient Greek world that had this idea that all human beings originally were created as two creatures knit back to back, and that somewhere along the line each of these two-faced creatures were separated, so that literally what they were originally was a single being, but when their bodies were separated, they became two bodies sharing the same soul. So this idea of soulmate, at least in the Greek context, ties back to this idea of finding that person that way back in history you were connected to, and now you've lost touch, but you can reconnect through love. The Roman poet, famous Roman poet Ovid, said, "Love is a kind of war." Love and war, same thing according to Ovid. And Ovid, of course, was talking about romantic love and how the love of romance can get as intense and as painful as war can sometimes. Socrates, here's Socrates weighing in on love. He said, "Love is one of two things, he said. It's either the desire for that which one does not yet possess, or the desire not to lose what is possessed and loved. So notice for Socrates, in either case, love is fundamentally a desire for something, either what one doesn't have yet, or not to lose what one does have. Desire-driven. Let's jump ahead to the modern era. Mark Twain's memorable words about love. He said, "Love is the irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired." I think he's tapping into something pretty fundamental to human beings. Who does not want to be loved? Twain's point is that if we're not careful, love can simply become a love for the desire to be loved. And we know where things can go from there. Friedrich Nietzsche, that most consistent of atheists, he said this: "In the end, one loves one's desire, not what is desired." You wonder how much and how often Nietzsche's right about that sort of thing. That when people say, "I love this," or "I love this person," how much of it is the person and how much it is just the love of the desire. Desire is a powerful thing. I suppose we could even learn a thing or two about love from contemporary rock bands and their love songs. Here's the words of a tune from the 70s rock band Nazareth. The title of the song kind of says it all. Love hurts. Here's a few of the lyrics. Love hurts. Love scars. Love wounds and mars any heart not tough or strong enough to take a lot of pain. It holds, love is like a cloud. It holds a lot of rain. I know it isn't true. Love is just a lie made to make you blue. Love hurts. Ooh, 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 ooh. Love hurts. Makes you just want to go out and fall in love. Jump ahead a decade or two, and LCD Sound System, their song "I Can Change," put it this way: "Love is a murderer. Love is a murderer. Love is a curse shoved in a hearse. Love is an open book to a verse of your bad poetry." Ouch. Clearly someone who had a rough experience in love, but to actually slam your ex's poetry, that's low. Let's end with Mother Teresa, right? Mother Teresa. Here's a person who had a different take on love. Mother Teresa was tapping into the more fundamental kind of love that every human being is created for. Just 3 quotes from Mother Teresa on love. Mother Teresa said that the hunger for love is much more difficult to remove from a human being than the hunger for bread. That I think she's tapping into something so important here. We often think of the needs of humans. Well, what do humans really need, right? And often when we think of needs, we go to physical needs: food, air, water, shelter. But Mother Teresa said, actually, the hunger for love is more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread, for food. I think she's onto something. We'll actually come back to this idea here of how fundamental a need is love to human beings. Some would put it in the want category and put food in the need category. I'll challenge that in a bit here. Mother Teresa also said this about love. She said, "The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved." That if poverty is the lack of resources, the lack of things that one should have access to, Mother Teresa is saying the worst kind of poverty then is to be without, to lack love, which every human soul was created for and deeply longs for. And finally, love this insightful comment of Mother Teresa on love here, this final one. She said, "I have found the paradox that if you love until it hurts, there can be no more hurt, only more love. If you love to the point of hurt, at some point, there's no more hurt. There's just more love beyond beyond that point. To get there, I would imagine, one has to suffer a bit for others. And it reminds me of Jesus, for whom no one has suffered more for his beloved, for us, than Jesus, going to the point of death for his beloved, for us, so that at that point there's no more hurt, there's just more love. And that, but I think Mother Teresa must be tapping into the truth of Jesus Christ as she reflects that really powerful covenantal kind of love. See, when we come to covenant, we have to rethink love. So many of the quotes I just gave you, it's clear that when these people think about love, they're thinking about desire or maybe romantic love where one gets hurt. But that's not the kind of love Mother Teresa's tapping into here, and it's certainly not the kind of love that Jesus talks about through the Gospels. Not the kind of love the Apostle Paul calls us to in his letters. The kind of love that we're going to consider here now, at least the centerpiece of love around which all other types of love must be built, is what I'll call covenant love. But let's go a little deeper than that even. See, here's the problem. In the English language, we have one word, love, for a number of different things, a number of different concepts, really a number of different types of love. And because we only have one word for it, it's really easy for us to get confused about what we mean. You know, if I say to you, I love God, I love my wife Kelly, I love my good friend Bob, and I love Minnetonka Moosehide shoes, which I happen to love. Now, all those statements are true. I love all those things. But using that single English word love for each of those things can leave you and even me confused as to what my relationship is to those four objects of my love: God, my wife, my friend Bob, and my shoes. Let's consider how resorting to the Greek language might be helpful for us here. We know this. The more words we have to think about something, the more clear and accurate we can think about that thing. Our ability to conceive accurately, to understand things, is limited by our vocabulary. So if you have one word, love, to try to talk about the many dimensions of love, it's very easy to get confused. If, however, we have multiple words for different types of love, then clarity, at least more clarity, is possible. C.S. Lewis wrote this wonderful book, highly recommended, called The Four Loves. And he took four Greek terms. See, the Greek language, out of which arose really modern, ancient Western philosophy, was in a lot of ways a much more nuanced language to be able to capture different dimensions of a similar concept. Certainly this is the case for its use of multiple words for love. Lewis took just four of what were probably 6 or 7 words for love in the Greek language and talked about the four loves. Using these loves, let's go back to my four loves I mentioned a minute ago. Using the Greek words, I would perhaps say this. I agape God, I eros my wife Kelly, I philia my friend Bob, and I storge my Minnetonka Moosehide shoes. Those four different words now give you a sense that I'm saying different things about each of those different kinds of love. Let's look at them. Eros, romantic love. It comes from the Greek god Eros, and it's the word that gives us the other words like erotic, erotic love or romantic love. It's not just sex, though certainly the sexual attraction dimension of things is in there, but it's more than that. It's the mystery of that whole thing that draws people together in the name of romance. Sex, yes, but more than just sex. Then there's philia, friendship love. The name of our city in the U.S. called Philadelphia comes from this word. Literally means city of, we often say brotherly love, but it really it can be brotherly love or friendship love. It's a kind of love that's not romantic in nature, and yet is deep and intimate and personal, brotherly or friendship kind of love. We'll actually be talking more about friendship covenants later. Then there's storge, a term that's quite broad for an affection towards something. It can be as broad as a mother's affection for her newborn baby, all the way to my affection for a particular kind of shoe. An affectionate sort of feeling towards something. Finally, the fourth kind of love, agape, comes from a Greek word which originally was rather a vague term for love. But the early Christians took this term, and from the teachings of Jesus, they infused this term with new meaning. I would say a short definition of agape would be other-oriented, self-sacrificial, choice-based love that seeks the well-being of the beloved, of the other. Let's think about that for a minute. The first three loves, eros, philia, storge, and then that fourth love, I think is set apart into a distinct category, agape. Think with me for a minute, what are the differences, the fundamental differences between the first three loves, kind of in their own category, and this fourth love? What is the uniqueness of agape love? As I think about it, I see a number of things that distinguish agape from all the other three loves. On one hand, agape is not about desire, my desire for something. It is about my choice to put the other ahead of myself. Therefore, agape, unlike the other three loves, isn't based in feelings. It's based on a principle of the kingdom of God and a choice to live into that principle. Others before self. Agape is also the kind of love that God is. In 1 John 4:8, we're told that, well, the Greek says, ho theos agape estin. We translate that as God is agape. God is agape love. This is the kind of love in which God is, the kind of love that literally binds together the three persons of the Trinity as a single loving community, a being, a single God who just is love. The Apostle Paul puts it better than anyone ever has when he describes in an entire chapter, chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, what this agape love is. Let me read a bit of Paul's description. He says, agape love is patient and kind. Agape love is not jealous, not boastful, not proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no regard for wrongs that have been done to it. No keeping score. Agape does not rejoice in injustice. Rather, it rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Agape love never gives up on others. It never loses faith in others. It always hopes the best for others. It always endures. Agape love, Paul says, never fails. That captures, in a beautiful paragraph, the uniqueness of this kind of love. Notice that every description Paul gives of this kind of love is not based on how you feel about somebody, is not based on what they've done for you or have not done for you. It's simply based on the other person being, if they're a human being, created in the image of God, or if it's God himself just because he's God, that alone calls for our response of self-sacrificial love to God and to others. This is the uniqueness of agape love. Now here's the thing. Some people have said that agape love is the good love and all the others are bad loves. I don't think that's the case. I think C.S. Lewis is right when he says, look, all four of these loves are gifts from God to us. These four loves are meant to enrich our lives, all of them. But here's the thing. Agape love must lead, and the others must follow. Any one of the first three loves, eros, romantic love, philia, friendship love, storge, affection, any of those things disconnected from agape can quickly become serious problems in our lives. But any one of them connected to and led by agape can become beautiful gifts from God. Think about it. Agape plus eros, right? There is going to be an enduring, mutually sacrificial romantic love. Not one where people use each other, but where people pour into and protect, love, and serve each other. Philia plus agape. There's the kind of friendship that all of us hunger for. But philia minus agape, that's the kind of friendships that all too often we see in our culture where one betrayal can end the relationship. No forgiveness, no repair, no reconciliation. Just like eros minus agape can feel wonderful until the first person hurts someone. And then all of the rock and roll love songs about love hurts and how it ends relationships comes flooding in. Agape guides and keeps in proper priority the other three loves. Beautiful gifts of God as long as they are led by self-sacrificial, other-oriented, choice-based, what we can call covenant love. See, here's the thing. I think it's clear that human beings have been wired for unconditional love by God. Part of the homing device that God puts in us to draw us to Him is this insatiable hunger to be loved, really to love and to be loved. We are wired for unconditional love, and that's why when you take human beings and they experience relationships where they don't find enduring unconditional love, when you take romantic relationships where one heart is broken as they're rejected by the other, or a friendship where someone is betrayed and there's no forgiveness, these kind of things damage us, put up walls and scars and calluses in our hearts, things that were never meant to be there. Humans were never designed to experience rejection. They were designed ultimately to be loved by God, who is unconditional love, and then for each of us to reflect that love back to each other and to God Himself. But in this broken world, we end up experiencing pain and rejection. But we're wired for something more. We are wired for God, who is unconditional love. Let me give you a few quotes on this, a few words from some experts, one could say. Keanu Reeves, well-known actor, he put it this way once in an interview. He said, "My own concept of a personal hell would be living without love, without the experience of being able to experience it or being able to give it." Very insightful, I think. Hollywood actor who has been on the inside of what's really important about life. It comes down to love. As Keanu Reeves said, if he couldn't give and receive love, that's his own definition of hell. Fascinating. I think he's not far off the actual theological definition of hell, a place where God's love simply is not. Elton John once uttered these words in an interview in the early 90s. "Despite all the successes, I think I just wanted to be loved. I wanted someone in my life to love me." Why I think this is fascinating from someone like Elton John, someone whose name recognition, whose fame has reached international proportions, who's made more money than one could probably spend in a lifetime, who's been more successful at their chosen career than one could ever expect to be. And yet, with all that, Elton says he realizes the one thing he was looking for the whole time was just someone in his life to love him. The former lead singer of Queen, Freddie Mercury, he put it in a very, very insightful way. He put it this way. He said, "You can have everything in the world and still be the loneliest man. And that," he said, "is the most bitter type of loneliness." I think it's a very insightful statement there. Think about it. He's saying if you have everything in the world and yet you're still lonely, that is a uniquely bitter type of loneliness. When you think about that, what that means is you have everything. And when you have everything, a lot of people want to be your friend. See, once you have everything, from that point on, you're not sure if people love you for you or if they love you for your stuff and who you are. I think Mercury is pointing this out. It's something that we often don't think about as we're trying to pursue the American dream and all the success we can, not realizing you can get to a point where the one thing you actually need, love, you start wondering if that's even possible. Do people ever just love you? He goes on. He says, success has brought me world idolization and millions of pounds. He's a very big guy, like a little British humor there. But it's prevented me, he said, from having the one thing we all need, a loving, ongoing relationship. His success prevented that knowledge of ever knowing that someone just loves him for himself. Kid Rock, in his song Only God Knows Why, he puts it this way: outstretched hands and one-night stands, still I can't find love. Another insightful comment here. Here's a guy who on a weekly basis is in auditoriums with people literally raising their hands to him. Right? You ever think about that? That rock stars, as their crowds are giving them adulation, are seeing pretty much what God sees on Sunday mornings as we raise our hands in worship. Right? You'd think to be worshipped as a rock star is going to be about as much love as someone can handle. Kid Rock says, no. Actually, the outstretched hands, the one-night stands, part of the rock and roll lifestyle, all the sexual intimacy you want. Yet he says, still I can't find love. Interesting. Here's Kid Rock, maybe not using the Greek words, but he's sorting out the difference between the adulation of the crowd and the eros of one-night stands, and realizing that unconditional agape love is still missing from that experience. The Backstreet Boys, here we go. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you did, as long as you love me. A little desperate, I would say. Let's move to the Beatles. They just sung it. All you need is love, they said. One of their famous songs. Let's move to the Beatles. They just sung it in one of the most famous songs. All you need is love. Then they broke up. Which goes to show that from the ancient world to the modern, from Aristotle to the Backstreet Boys to the Beatles, everyone knows deep inside that we're wired for this love. And everyone also knows that it's hard to find, and if you find it, it's hard to hang on to. Yet this is what it means to be human, is to pursue loving and being loved. Back to a point I made earlier, I don't think that things like food, water, and shelter are necessities, whereas love is maybe just a luxury or a want. You know, it's hard to test this one. What would happen if you took a human being and gave them all the physical necessities, but didn't give them love? Would they survive? You know, thankfully, we don't do that experiment to human beings. But one rather troubled emperor, namely Emperor Frederick II in the 12th century, he actually tried an experiment that sort of went this way. He had this crazy theory that if you took some infants, I don't know where he got them, if he stole them from their parents or maybe they were orphans, who knows. But he tried this experiment where he took some infants in his kingdom and he gave them to some nannies, and their orders were, give them their physical necessities, feed them, you know, keep them warm, give them liquids, but don't speak to them, he said. He had this crazy idea that if you let them grow up and speak on their own without ever hearing any voices, that they would either speak Hebrew, because it was the language of the Bible, or they would speak their parents' original language from their genetics or something like that. So he wanted to do this experiment. Here's what's interesting. As he tried this, apparently according to the records we have, none of the infants grew up long enough for him to see what they would say. All of them died as little children. When you don't speak to a human being, when you do not give them words, and therefore the kind of things that come with words, like human contact, human connection, love, they don't survive. They literally do not thrive, is the technical term. They die. Love is absolutely essential to the human condition. And yet we know at the same time that while we're wired for it, while we do need it, every time we enter into a place of love, there's a risk involved. At least every place where love occurs apart from the God who is love. The one place we can find unquestionable, unconditional love is in relationship with God. But every human love that we step into, there's the potential for hurt and pain. There's the potential for rejection, yes, but there's the potential for a beautiful relationship with no rejection, but the other person dies. All of us perish at some point. So it's true that being involved with people in loving relationships can, and at some point probably will, bring pain. But the alternative is to distance ourselves, to put protective walls around our heart, and to actually do damage to ourselves as we try to save ourselves from the pain of love. C.S. Lewis puts it this way, again in his book, The Four Loves. He says, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken." He says, if you want to make sure of keeping your heart intact, then you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in a casket or a coffin of your own selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken, but it will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. Lewis is so right on this one. If we, in the hopes of not being hurt, step back with our hearts from people, in the very process of trying to protect ourselves from relationships, that isolation, Lewis points out, does things to our heart, hardens it, makes it impenetrable, makes it, in the end, not even open to the love of God. How then do we do love? William Dembski, in his book, The End of Christianity, puts it this way. In a fallen world, the only currency of agape love is suffering. Indeed, he says, the only way to tell how much one person loves another is by what that person is willing to endure for the other. Without the cost incurred by suffering, love among fallen creatures becomes cheap and self-indulgent. It's simply the case that in this world of brokenness, now this is not the case certainly for the new heavens, the new earth, when Jesus' kingdom reigns, but in this world of brokenness and self-centeredness, we only know how much true love we are willing to serve and give others by the amount we are willing to suffer for others. It's part of the nature of self-giving love, is being willing to bear pain for the beloved. Now, how can we do this? I'll propose the only way humans can sustain that kind of love is not on our own. I'm not able to, I do not have the resources to unendingly suffer for someone else in love. But what I do have is the ability to open my heart up to the unconditional love of God and to let His love pour into me and through me to others such that He can sustain me in loving those who are causing me pain, even in the midst of my pain, because His unconditional love never leaves or forsakes me or for you. The way for us to move in unending love relationship with others is by having God's love pouring to us, protecting our hearts in His love, and therefore being able to be vulnerable to others on the human sphere of things.